Hello, 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 and welcome to the March 2025 episode of Thought of You, a podcast from me, Amelia Freeby,
And me, Taylor Lise Morrison.
where we let all of you into our BFF group chat. I guess it's just us. Is it a group chat if there are only two people?
I think two people is a group. I will
Great.
just, from my Bible days, where two or more are gathered, the Spirit is here.
Beautiful. So we are letting you, dear listeners, into our group chat where the spirit has gathered in signal for us to send a million links to each other every month. And on this podcast, we talk about those links we've been sending and the things that are coming up in our lives on and offline every month. This is our third ever episode. So if you're tuning in, you're right at the beginning of this project. We're so grateful that you're here. And we like to dive in with a little segment we call First Thought, Best Thought, which is really just our way of getting a little loose, warming things up with the first thing on our minds today. So Taylor, would you like to kick us off with your First Thought, Best Thought of the month?
Absolutely. So the first two, it was a little harder to choose one. This one, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to share. So you all have probably heard quotes. The quote that's top of mind for me is from the play Our Town, and it says, "Does anyone realize life while they live it? The saints and the poets do to some extent." I'm paraphrasing. And there's other quotes that talk about how in times of revolution, we need the artists, we need the poets, etc., etc. And that is really true for me and my mental health right now. So the National Poetry Foundation, they have this beautiful poem a day email. And I think I was signed up a long time ago and then I unsubscribed. I signed up again. And it just gives me so many beautiful moments throughout my week I mostly use my personal email to say, oh, I have a doctor's appointment or some very mundane things. And then I go in there and all of a sudden I'm transported for a couple minutes into a world of poetry. And sometimes it's like super heavy. Sometimes it's these light, fluffy, airy poems, but I'm always really, really present as I'm reading. And I never explicitly stated this intention, but basically what happens if I see the poem, I'm going to take however long to read it. And it gives me the space to get lost in a world that is not our world for a couple minutes. And then so often I'm bringing something with me, whether it's just an appreciation for the art, a way that they phrase something, an inspiration for me to go and do something creative that day. So it's so simple. And man, it's just really doing a lot for me these days.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. And unbeknownst to you, and also to me at the time that I did this, there is an episode of my other podcast, Pleasure Reading, that is out today that features 7 recent poetry collections that I have bought and read in the past year or so. They all were published in 2023, 2024, or 2025. So those are all like very recent collections and poems about the moments that we are living through. But I also love the way that a poem can transport you to a different place in time and transform or transmute your emotions, your experience in that process. How beautiful. What a gift.
Yeah. Shout out to the poets. And also, actually, I did not plan this, but I borrowed a book from my friend and then lost it for like a year. So I felt like I had to give her a new book alongside returning her book. And I just bought this. It's called The Magic Words, and it has a bunch of poetry prompts that you can do. So I have it here at my desk. I haven't started working with it yet, but just when I need a little brain break so I can not just read poetry, but also write some poetry.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I used to write poems all the time in college and grad school, and now I just write marketing emails. That feels so sad for me. I mean, it's fine. I don't need to have a judgment of that, but definitely like if I looked at my phone notes from like 2010 to 2019, they were like full of these like snippets of poems I was working on. And if I look now, it's just like, here are content ideas or email subject line ideas or like ways I'm going to sell this thing. So that's inspiring me to reclaim a bit of my creative energy for myself and my art, not just my business.
I mean, your birthday's coming up, so now you're giving me some ideas for birthday presents.
Love it. Well, let me give you my first thought, best thought, which is a very different thing, very different mood. I'm really just kind of here to clown on myself with this one, and it is a inside joke between my partner and I that has come up where JJ, shout out to JJ, who listens to this show. It's the only one of my podcasts JJ listens to every episode of so far.
JJ sends me texts at specific parts, and I'm like, oh, I know I said a good joke there because JJ's texting me about it. So truly, shout out to JJ.
Hello, my spouse. Well, okay, I'm mentioning JJ because JJ has been making fun of me for being in my bro era, which, if you know me, I'm not at all a bro. Like, I barely even talk to men in my life. But what has happened in 2025 is that I have gotten very into two very bro-y things. One is sourdough, and the other is Peloton. So somehow, 10 years into Peloton's existence, 5 years past when Peloton was most popular, I have suddenly been like, I'm going to get on these bike rides. I'm going to figure out who Cody Rigsby is. I'm going to like be on Peloton 4 or 5 days a week. I just crossed, I think, like 25 or 50 rides or something like this. I'm like doing the milestones. I got the streak. I went to the gynecologist 2 weeks ago, and all we talked about the whole time was Peloton. Like straight up, like this is an overshare. I'm like getting a pap smear talking about Peloton. That is how intense this has gotten. I I don't even know any other way to be than enthusiastic about it, but I'm just really enjoying it. And I'm realizing, I think you can relate to this maybe a bit, Taylor, like spin instructors are just like motivational speakers. Like they all have big youth pastor energy, just giving me a pep talk while I like stay in motion on my little bike in my basement and just keep pedaling. And honestly, I think that energy is really working for me with how challenging this year has been. I don't know. Have you ever tried Peloton? Do you do any of these class things?
I do not do Peloton. I do Obey, OBE, because normally when I say it, people are like, that sounds really intense. It's called Obey. It's short for Our Body Electric, and it's similar, but it's mostly like body weight. No, they have weight stuff too. But yeah, my favorite dude, they did a Black History Month one. I'm like doing my little arm weight things. They're teaching me about two Black women that I hadn't heard, like how they contributed to history. And so, yes, I'm all about the motivational. You are talking to me as I'm doing it. Does Peloton do name shout outs? Because Obey does that sometimes. If you join live, it'll be like, yeah, Taylor, keep going. And I love the acknowledgement.
Yes, I need to take a live class so I can get a shout out. I promise myself when I get to my 100th ride, I will do it live. And even in my head, I'm already like, well, when I get to like my 1000th ride, I should go to New York and I should be in the studio and I should like try to do it there. Like that's how far down the line my brain has started going. But yes, I love the name shout outs. I love just like a movement class that's super motivational. I tried Obey and did enjoy it, but I think part of the thing that's really making Peloton work for me is that they use popular music, like top 40 music. So the first ride I did was a Charlie XCX Brat ride. Or like this morning, JJ was like, you should listen to some like 2000s hip hop. And so I'm like looking up Ashanti and like finding a ride that has an Ashanti song in it. And that has been really fun for me and motivational for me. Like I really need the tracks to keep me through. And I remember this even from my like fitness class days in high school and college, like going to the Zumba classes my mom used to teach and being like, okay, I can do this because I really like Cyndi Lauper. But if it wasn't Cyndi Lauper, I couldn't do this. So anyway, I've gotten very into Peloton and I've also gotten very into sourdough. I decided last year I was like gonna get a starter. So I ordered a starter from this random person on the internet that I think I learned about from Michelle at Holisticism. We can link it in the show notes. It's this like some dude's starter that has been in circulation for almost a century or something. And other people have like taken on the mantle of sending out the starter. And you just have to send a self-addressed stamp envelope and they'll send you some. And so I had the starter for a while and I finally was like, I'm gonna get this going. And I did get it going. And it took me a while to make bread that was edible. And the first couple times I was so stressed, like so overwhelmingly stressed, especially, and sourdough is like a whole day process. So I was just stressed for like 12 to 15 hours a day the first few months I was trying to do this. And now it's so easy. and I do it every weekend or every other weekend. And I talk a lot about my bread, and I think about things like crumb, and I like am really kind of annoying about it. So JJ says I'm in my bro era, and we have now named our sourdough starter Bro, but spelled like dough, so like Brough. And I don't know, I'm just embracing it. I guess this goes along with like our first episode that I jokingly said was we're in our Joe Rogan era. I don't know what's happening to me. I am in like my emperor year in tarot. I guess it's just who I am for right now. So that's my first thought, best thought. Amelia the Bro checking in. If anybody wants to talk to me about Peloton and all of your other friends quit doing it, but you still love it, I'm brand new and I'm so obsessed. So come talk to me about Peloton or sourdough.
I just have to shout you out because I, on a whim, got some sourdough for my Buy Nothing group. I did not realize. Everyone's like, oh, sourdough is so easy. I did not realize it was a whole day process. So I was like, oh, yeah, I'll start this thing before I go to bed. Like, it'll rise overnight. I'll do something in the morning. So Amelia sent me like this very kind voice note, favorite recipe, etc., etc. Have I tried doing sourdough again? No. Is the starter still in my fridge for when I feel ready to do it? Yes. I'm thinking between like my spring semester and then when our summer session starts, maybe I'll get back into it. But I realized, oh, this is like another project that I had not properly allotted space for in my life. But I have you as my concierge when I need it.
Yes, absolutely. If anyone else needs a low-key sourdough concierge, I am here for you. We can put my favorite recipe in the show notes, including the extra notes I have to add to it because I have some qualms with things it thinks you need to do that I don't think you need to do. But yeah, my approach to sourdough is like, how can this be as easy as possible while knowing that like the biggest thing is the timing. And you can't control the timing because some of it depends on the weather and the temperature, how fast things will rise. But as we're recording, I currently have 2 Tupperware containers of sourdough pizza dough that are like overflowing onto my kitchen counter. They look really funny because the dough has it's like popped the top off of the Rubbermaid and it's like spilling out the sides. It's really silly. And after this, I will go make pizza with them and deal with the mess. But yes, we love sourdough. It's magical and it's a little stressful when you first get started. So it is. Okay, should we move on to circling back to things that we've talked about before? Is it time? I think we call this our circle back segment, but so far the main thing we've circled back about is Spotify. So we're going to talk about Spotify again today. Hopefully everybody else is still excited to talk about Spotify. But Taylor, can you tell everyone about this podcast episode that you sent me that kind of reignited the Spotify conversation for us again?
Yeah, so I'm a big Sam Sanders fan. I have listened to Sam Sanders Be On podcast since he was on the NPR Politics podcast, which is wild because that's almost a decade. I did not fully think of that. That also foreshadowing for some stuff we might talk about later. And he has his own show right now. Congrats to him. It's syndicated. He's going to be all over our NPR airwaves. And I was curious about this podcast because it's called Carolyn Rose, the album you won't find on Spotify. And because we've been talking about this for however many months at this point, like double click, let me in. And the episode is all about this artist who has done a bunch of albums, has gone the traditional route of publishing them on Spotify, and decided to do something different, not just artistically in how they approach this album, but also from a distribution perspective. And in the conversations we've had about Spotify before, it's been, here's this reporter doing investigative reporting on Spotify. Here's us talking theoretically about what the artist's experience is. This is the first time I really got to hear someone say, this is how it affected me, and here's the choice that I made because of it. So had to send it to you immediately.
Yeah, as soon as you sent it to me, I was like, oh, I recognize this artist's name. And it was fascinating to me because the reason I knew their name was because of Spotify. So the artist is Carolyn Rose, and Spotify worked so hard to get me to listen to their 2018 album. I think it's called Loner. Yeah, Loner, and also their 2020 album Superstar. Like, I had the visual of those album covers imprinted into my mind because of how frequently they'd show up in my algorithmically suggested music. And they were always coming on after playlists had ended. They were showing up in various parts of my Spotify. Like, I knew exactly the image as soon as I saw the artist's name. And then also, could I name a single song by them? No. Could not name one. Couldn't name one. I could see the visual of the album art, but I didn't know a single song, and I had never bought any of their music. And so I was so fascinated to listen to this interview about this new album that they had created that is not on Spotify, and they're not putting on Spotify. And that album is called, I just bought it. Where is my Year of the Slug? That's right. I knew it had a funny name. It's called Year of the Slug. You can buy it on Bandcamp. It's great. I've listened to it all now and I loved it. But it was really interesting to hear them talk about just the different ways that Spotify has both supported and harmed musicians, the ways that music can travel farther in certain instances, but also make way less money. And also their creative process around like deciding to make an album that seemingly like from the outset was not going to be on Spotify, like an album that was not about being sort of algorithm bait or at least like appealing to algorithms, and shifting their tour strategy as well, going from like having a full band to like playing acoustic, traveling like a much smaller sort of group of people, traveling fewer shows, and only working. The other piece of this that I thought was really interesting is their most recent tours only booked on venues that are not Live Nation venues. So this episode wasn't just about Spotify and Spotify's impact on the music industry, but also about Live Nation and their impact on music venues and live music. And that really had me thinking on a whole nother level of like, where do I go to shows? How do I think about going to shows? And honestly, I was kind of like, oh, kind of stopped going to shows. So thinking about like going to shows again and what would that feel like? And how do I feel like, frankly, for me, a lot of it is like, how do I feel safe at a show in a world where like we still live with COVID and you can still get sick in these like cramped, crowded, not always well ventilated spaces. Like that didn't come up in the episode, but that started coming up for me when I thought about like a desire to go see more live music again. So yeah, I was so fascinated by listening to the conversation. I highly recommend everyone go listen to it after you listen to this. Also, just like go listen to everything in the Sam Sanders universe. Like the whole back catalog of Into It is amazing. And we've talked about Vibe Check before, a show they're also one of the hosts of. Like, do it all. But I'm curious, Taylor, was there anything else that came up for you around like the Spotify or the Carolyn Rose of it all?
Yeah, the other thing that got me really excited, and you touched on this a little bit, but this sense of having a hidden gem that you find that a friend tells you about rather than your experience on Spotify, where Spotify says, Amelia, and it's like yelling at you, neon sign, like very Times Square-esque. Amelia, we want you to like this podcast. We're going to keep, or podcast album. We're going to keep telling you to like this album until you finally click onto it. Like how different that is versus you or I sending a text to each other and saying, I loved this song so much, I think you'll like it. And there's an intimacy in that. And it's something, honestly, I've been thinking about in business as well. Just the idea of word of mouth. I think I did not know I was going to go here, but Hitch, iconic movie. And remember Hitch's business card? It was just like this black, like you wouldn't even know who it was. It was only if you knew, you knew. And there's something really cool about that in what Carolyn's playing with that I appreciate. I think more people can start to lean into that. And there's this sense of, honestly, like identity construction that can happen when you're one of the people who has discovered this thing and your friend told you about it. And it can go the way of being really annoying hipster. Like, I knew this before it was cool. But there also were some cool parts about being a hipster. And so I wonder if we're about to go full circle back into this hipster moment where it's so easy to find everything now and to have things served up to you. I guess not find. It's so easy to have so many things served up to you. and they try and position it as finding. But when you find that gem, I think Carolyn talks in that episode about you going to the record store and saying, oh, this looks interesting. There's more ownership in that. There's more intimacy in that. There's more connection in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I keep thinking about how like algorithms are like, and these algorithmically fueled platforms are like tastemakers with no taste. Like there's no actual point of view there. And I do think we're just in this really hard moment, right? Where like if we think about music, the sort of like spaces you might have gone to that had an editorial point of view, like, you know, Pitchfork is the one for like the hipsters everywhere. Like those have been so eroded in our current media landscape that it's like I feel like we are really all just going back to the group text for music recommendations. Like my most listened to album of the last month was one that a new friend of mine sent out with her newsletter, and I bought it on Bandcamp. It's 5 songs, an album, and I listened to it over and over and over again. It's called Bad Moves. That's the name of the band and the album. And I think they're like a punk band out of somewhere on the East Coast. Oh, it's only 4 songs, 12 minutes. I've listened to it so much. Apparently it came out in like 2016. So, but it's just the fact that like she linked to it, like this is great. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'll just listen to this. And then because I'm not on Spotify with it, like trying to get me to listen to other stuff, now on Apple Music, I just put it on my computer and it just shows me that. And I just play that over and over again. So yeah, I'm so intrigued to see how recommendation culture continues to evolve, how tastemaker culture evolves, and what we see happening in the face of all of this. So that's our this month circle back on Spotify. Look forward to next month where we might circle back on Spotify again. Who knows? We will see what happens. I feel like it's going to keep coming up this year. But the other circle back that I wanted to bring up today is I need to confess something about loneliness, perhaps, which is that when we recorded last time, we talked about loneliness. And is there a loneliness epidemic? And I was like, I don't know. I don't feel lonely. And I asked you, Taylor, if you felt lonely, and you had like a beautiful description of what that felt like for you. And then basically within not very long of us recording that, I spent Valentine's Day weekend alone because JJ, shout out to JJ again, left town to go to a chess tournament with their friends or their work friends. And I was just hanging out by myself, and it snowed. So I didn't leave my house for like 3 or 4 days in a row. And it was just me and the dog wouldn't go outside because there was snow on the ground. So I'm just like being at home by myself, stressed with no one to talk to. And I was lonely. And I was like, this is happening because I said on the podcast that I'm not lonely. But I think that it just reminded me that emotions are fleeting. They're not permanent. Some last longer than others. Sometimes you feel not lonely. Sometimes you feel really lonely. And I think that the reason I wanted to circle back was, one, just in case anybody had the impression I never feel lonely based on what I said last time, I have learned that is not true. I would like to say that on the record. And also, I think it's why it's so challenging to say something like some of those articles do, that there's like a loneliness epidemic. I was trying to think about like, what does it mean to have an epidemic of a feeling? And that's a question I'm still sitting with. Like, how long do emotional states last? How are they shared among people? And how do we make broad generalizations about them at like a population level? Those are my like high level questions that all came from me just like being lonely on Valentine's Day. But I did order a heart-shaped pizza, and the delivery guy who brought it to my house brought me a red carnation, which was very sweet. So that was fun.
I love that. So you got a little bit of human interaction in the midst of your loneliness, acute loneliness moment.
Yeah, by my ALM. Just a little ALM for my Valentine's Day. Okay, so those are our circle backs. I feel like we did this like pretty quickly today. We're like moving at a thought of you kind of pace. So let's take it on into our first topic of the day. So if you're a brand new listener, every episode we do our first thought, best thought. We have a quick circle back on things we talked about before. And then Taylor and I pick kind of 2, 3, even 4 things from our group chat that we want to talk about here on the podcast. So today we're going to talk about 3 things. The first is going to be the 10-year rule. The second is going to be this anti-SNARF manifesto that Buzzsprout just put out. Yes, SNARF is the thing that I said. I will explain what that is later. Stick around for that. And the third is all of our thoughts on award season. So now that the Oscars are over, we're going to talk about the Oscars. We're going to talk about the Grammys. We're going to talk about all the other awards shows I don't watch. So that will come at the very end. We'll probably get a little more gossipy by that point. But we're going to start with the serious business of it all, which is the 10-year rule and how being prolific makes that more interesting. So Taylor, will you take us in to what the 10-year rule is and maybe some fun examples of it?
For sure. So this is actually a throwback because I think I originally sent this to you in September. The concept of the 10-year rule, I got this from Cal Newport's podcast, Deep Work, I think is what it's called. Something like that, deep something. And the idea of the 10-year rule is essentially you need to put in 10 years of doing something. And it doesn't mean specifically like I need to put in 10 years of being a tulip farmer and then I will blow up in the Netherlands. It's like I spend 10 years, maybe I realize I'm interested in agriculture and I try different things and then something, no pun intended, blooms from that within 10 years. So what was interesting listening to that in that moment at the end of 2024, now being in 2025, I graduated from college in May 2025 or May 2015. And so I'm about to hit that 10-year mark of being out of college. You're just a touch older than me. And it felt interesting to engage with that type of concept at this stage of my career where I've got some years under my belt versus me listening to something like this in college being like, okay, what seeds do I need to plant? So I got to engage with this idea in this liminal space of what have I been doing for 10 years? And then also, what do I want to start doing now so that in 10 years, this beautiful thing can bloom? So that's the TLDR of that concept. And we were brainstorming some examples of this, maybe because we keep talking about Spotify so much. And also, we genuinely love music. We're always sending videos, songs, etc. to each other. The first examples that came to mind for me are Doechii. And then you also mentioned Chapel Roan. So I will have a little Doechii stan moment. But if you haven't seen this already, we'll link to some of these. Well, we'll link to one of these in the show notes. But Doechii has been documenting her experience trying to be a musical artist on YouTube for a long time. Some of the videos that are really surfacing are her going through the artist way. And she's doing, if you're not familiar with the artist way, it's like a very classic, it's kind of the OG course. It's like a 12-week course in a book. You have all these things that you do to reconnect to your creative spirit. There's journaling prompts that you do. There's activities that you do. There's reflections. And instead of just writing it, Doechii's narrating what's coming up for her. And you got to see her doing this creative work. She also just yesterday, launched, I think she did the song over, who sings Somebody That I Used to Know? Yes. Over the Gautier Somebody That I Used to Know beat, she's rapping and singing this song. That blew up 6 years later. She just released it as a single yesterday. So there's this element of we're seeing these things that she's been working at. She's been playing with her style. She's been doing all these different things. And now she's giving these incredible performances. Grammy's performance, incredible. One of the Stevens, Colbert, I don't know which one of them, incredible performance with like the connected braids. She's just having moment after moment after moment. And I'm seeing conversations. I think part of this is misogynoir, but of, oh, she's an industry plant. She's coming out of nowhere. But literally the receipts are right there of her deciding she wants to be in music and also really experimenting with her style. And she actually in interviews has talked about how doing the artist way helped her find the voice that we now know of as Doechii. So that is, man, I had a lot of words to say about Doechii. I think she's incredible. She's just, as someone who wanted to be on Broadway when I was younger, and she also was a theater kid, you can just tell she loves performing. She loves creating experiences, and it's so fun. I like being in her fandom world.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely. And, you know, not to spoiler us, but like that took her all the way to Best Rap Album at the Grammys this year, right? So like also now incredibly popular and recognized by her peers, and like really seeing this. I love like the way that music she's made in the past is now becoming popular now, or being like released as singles. It's just this beautiful like 10-year full circle integration moment that we all get to witness. And of course, I feel like we also saw this with Chappell Roan over the past year. So an artist who, you know, was really trying to become a singer and songwriter as a kid, and went to like the camps and traveled and eventually got signed by, I believe it was Atlantic Records, I think in her teens, and then put out some music and got dropped from the label, and had been living in LA, had to move home to the Midwest, and essentially made this new album that, and booked an opening spot on Olivia Rodrigo's tour. And then this like starts to have this like meteoric rise, which led to like the giant Lollapalooza performance last year, which I think you were at, Taylor. Is that right?
the universe really wanted me to be there because like one of Matt's coworkers' daughters got sick that day and was like, "Do you want a ticket?" And I was like, "Yes." And then I got to see her with all of these people. I've been to Lolla a few times and I've never seen it. Speaking of like feeling safe, I did not fully feel safe, but I was glad that I was there.
Yeah, when I see the like crowd videos of that show, I'm just like, this is terrifying, but I'm also glad that you were there. And, you know, her journey was not straightforward or linear. Like, I'm the annoying hipster here who's like, I remember when My Kink is Karma dropped, I listened to it a lot in 2022, and I kept waiting for an album to come out. And I was like, hello, like, I love this song. What is happening? But she got dropped by her label. And so she had to like go through this whole journey before you actually get the full album, like The Rise of the Midwest Princess, right, that comes out. And then that still took time to become really popular. And I had tickets to see her at like a tiny, not tiny, but like small Cedar Rapids venue last spring that got like canceled and rebooked to a much bigger space because she had started like selling out. She couldn't do these small venues anymore, like alongside the Olivia Rodrigo tour. She had to book these like ballrooms and stuff alongside that tour. So it's just really interesting to see her rise over time. And you can also go look at her YouTube videos from a decade ago and see kind of what's happening. And now she also has a new single coming out, I think next week when we're putting this out. I'm pretty sure The Giver is dropping on March 13th. So I'm very excited for all of this. It's also reminding me of another artist who's up and coming right now, a musician who's been doing this forever, which is Tate McRae, who is like another child star, sort of. Not really a child star, like a child striver is what I want to say. That sounds so weird to say, but like was a dancer as a kid, was on So You Think You Can Dance, was on the other dance show that I don't watch. What's the ballroom one?
Dancing with the Stars.
Dancing with the Stars. Yes, thank you. And like started making music and has been singing and been a songwriter and posting on YouTube forever. And like I really think kind of just this year is really having her moment of her album becoming really popular. Her music is circulating. Her tours are getting bigger. She was on one of the late night shows recently. She's like dating Kid Laroi, like, you know, somebody else who's been like in it for so long and is just now really landing. I mean, she's probably been in it for more than 10 years, although I say that and I'm like, I don't know, she's probably 22, so maybe it's only been 10 years. I have no clue. I feel like an old person sometimes when I watch these videos, but I love to see it. The 10-year rule in action, all of these musicians making their mark.
I feel like I totally blanked when we were brainstorming. I feel like one of the most obvious ones is Charlie XCX, who like had a hit that we all loved literally a decade ago and then had to go on her own journey to literally create the color of the summer. I mean, I live really close to what was once called Boys Town in Chicago, and like the number of people I saw in Brat Green, the number of times I heard Charlie XCX songs bumping over the summer. So another really strong example of the 10-year rule.
No, absolutely. My best friend in college was Charlie XCX for Halloween, like multiple years in a row, like probably 2011, 2012, and nobody knew who she was. Like we did, but like nobody had any clue. And I thought about that a lot last year when like everybody knew who Charlie XCX was or wore Brat Green for Halloween. I was like, Anastasia was here way before the rest of you. She was really on it. But, oh, I love this. Okay, the other reason I'm really glad we made this list, though, is because if you go listen, not you, like if you go listen to the Cal Newport episode, I'm sorry, but all of these white men podcasters just reference other white men. So if you listen, he's going to talk about Michael Crichton a lot. And that's fine. Yay, Michael Crichton. We all love Jurassic Park. I'm down. But I am really tired. Like after you resurfaced this episode for us, Taylor, like the Cal Newport episode, then I went and listened to a Tim Ferriss episode he was citing. And that sent me to like a Seth Godin episode that Tim Ferriss was citing. And the whole time I was like, they have only talked about other white dudes as their examples exclusively. And it just makes me so acutely aware of how, I mean, A, alienating that is, but B, like uninteresting that is to me. Like I need people to have different and better and more diverse examples when they're pulling this stuff forward, because we just came up with 4 super fast off the top of our heads, really off of probably our playlist from the past couple months. And it also feels like a personal challenge to myself to be always thinking about like, okay, is everyone I'm talking about just like somebody who looks like me? Because that's not the whole world. And also, I don't know, it just really struck me when I was listening to them. I was like, they're signaling to me that this is not for me because they're not talking about anybody who has like any relationship to my experience of the world.
That's why it was surprising that I can't tell you, that may be the last Cal Newport episode I listened to. Like I have it in my feed, but I can only take so much of him. I loved Deep Work as a concept, as a book, but yeah, it does really give those bro vibes, and not in like the Amelia's in her bro era. It's endearing vibes. It's just it gets very annoying very quickly, and yeah, we need to do better. We can do better. Like you said, we came up with this very, very quickly. I'd also love for people who are listening and joining us on Substack, if you could add like other 10-year rule examples. We kind of went down the music route because that was just what was top of mind for us, but let's crowdsource some that are not just Ryan Holiday and whoever else.
Oh yeah, Ryan Holiday came up a lot. Okay, not to make it about us, but also to make it about us, Taylor. What have you been doing for 10 years? You kind of said this at the top, but I want to know, like, what are your 10-year things? What are you coming to about the 10-year rule for yourself?
This was some really excavative work. Also, yeah, I'm in this moral ethics / moral philosophy class, and I was joking about it with my colleagues, my student colleagues, and we were just talking about how in that we're just telling all our business, because the prompts are like, when's a time where you had to do something and no one liked it? And I ended up writing about this whole influencer drama that I had in 2020. So I'm just in this mood, and have been for the whole semester, of, oh yeah, this is what past version of me did. So as it relates to the 10-year rule, the biggest things that come to mind for me are, first, writing publicly on the internet. I found my old blog. I have trouble finding it. Like, I had to jump through a lot of hoops to find it just now. I have found it, like, I think I found it 2 seconds before Amelia hit record. So if you can find it, I will give you a prize if you can figure it out. All of that to say, I have been writing on the internet for over a decade as like a lifestyle blog. I had some sponsored posts back in the day. I really thought I was doing something. It's funny because you highlighted this when we were talking about it in our chat. Even then, I was calling myself like a serial entrepreneur, which now is hilarious because I'm like, I didn't really build anything of scale. I was building a lot of stuff, but I wasn't, which I guess is another 10-year rule thing, is practicing getting things off the ground, conceptualizing things. A lot of the stuff that I was doing at that point was kind of me being like, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to announce it, and then I'm going to go on to the next thing. But bless her that she saw the serial entrepreneur seeds being planted. The other thing is facilitation. So I started facilitating in my first job out of college. And it was mostly because I was in a leadership development program. There was an opportunity to get trained in facilitating this, they called it inclusive diversity workshop, which is another thing that has been a thread through my work for a long time. It's funny because I don't talk about it as much in my personal brand, but in the work that I do in the world, I end up doing a lot of DEI work, or I did. So yeah, I said yes to doing that. It ended up being pretty easy, and not to be prideful, but I was realizing it was coming to me a lot easier than it was to other people. Not just the concepts, but being able to hold the room, switch gears if we needed to. I didn't feel like I needed to be glued to my manual. So yeah, those are probably the two biggest things, like writing, putting stuff out into the world. Even though I didn't start calling myself, I was writing on the internet for 6-7 years before I officially called myself a writer, which is my own creative angst that I had to work through. And then facilitation, which is now a huge part of the work that I do, to the point that I'm co-founding this group with my two other co-founders, I guess, women facilitating, gathering women who are facilitators in different spaces to have a place where we can come be excited about the craft of facilitation and learn and grow together. So both of those things, I always knew I wanted to write, but I didn't see facilitation looming as large as it has in my career.
Yeah, I love both of these, the blog and the facilitation. And, I also have been writing publicly on the internet for a very long time. I mean, starting honestly with like my Tumblr blog in high school, but that was mostly reblogging, not very much writing. I started my first actual blog on Blogspot when I was in college. It was in 2011. I looked it up before we started this. I will not be sharing the link, but it's online. I was definitely sleuthing myself, trying to be like, when did I do any of this stuff? But I think that the most notable ones for me are that I was really curious about. When you sent me this, I was like, when did I publish my first podcast episode? Like, when did the first one go public? Because the first show I worked on was not my own show, but it was for the radio station I was DJing for. So I went back through the Chirp Radio archives, and I was like, when I remembered my first interview, it was with this band called Clearance in Chicago. And I interviewed them at the radio station and had to edit it together and like mix in their music. And I was so nervous. And that episode came out in the fall of 2015. So it has been almost exactly 10 years, or it will be in like 6 months since that came out. And when I listen back, it's totally fine. Like, it is a solid, like, mediocre podcast episode. But what strikes me the most is how different my voice is. Because I was talking way in the back of my throat because I didn't really want to project anything and I wanted to sound cool. And like, I was not confident in what I was saying. I can hear myself slouching when I listen to it. I'm like, I was 100% like hiding in my body, and I could hear it in my voice. And I was like slurring my words, and I was talking like a quote unquote podcaster, how I thought a podcaster would talk, which is like certain things are too fast and others are too slow. And like the whole thing, I mean, when I listen now, I have so many critiques of it, but also I'm just like, bless 10 years ago me for just doing this and figuring it out. And also like how even now I'm like, how wild that I was like in studio with 3 guests trying to navigate this whole conversation for my first ever episode. Like, I would never advise one of my clients to do that. I'm like, start easy on yourself, please. That was not an easy way to begin. But it is fascinating. We'll link it in the show notes if anyone really wants to go listen to 23-year-old me try to be cool and talk to boys in bands and like sound smart. We'll put that up there if that is a fun time for you. It was not a fun time for me to listen to, but that could be your thing. And then the other thing I was curious about was like, how long have I actually been reading tarot? Because I'm an amateur tarot reader. Like, I do it as a personal practice and I talk about it a little bit publicly, but I don't offer readings or like sell tarot-y things. That's not part of my professional life. But I have been reading tarot for a long time for myself and for friends. And then I started my Tiny Tarot podcast, which was my way of just doing like studying tarot in public. And I have a little tarot zine from that podcast now. But I wanted to know, like, when did this really start? So I looked it up, and I ordered my first tarot deck in February 2016. So we've just passed 9 years. I very clearly remember when I ordered it. I was at the Whistler in Chicago with my friend Michelle, and we were talking about tarot, and I was like, I really want to get a tarot deck. I was following cool people on Instagram who were like pulling tarot cards, and I was like, I want this. But I was like, but I don't know, these decks are all scary looking. So she was like, well, you love like Alphonse Mucha, the Art Nouveau artist. I was like, yeah, I wonder if there is like a Mucha tarot deck. And I Googled it, and there was. And I ordered it on Amazon while I was sitting at the Whistler, and it showed up 2 days later, and I started reading for myself and using the little book that came in the box. And that's how it all began. And it's wild to realize I'll be like coming up on a decade of tarot reading. And I kind of liked thinking about these two examples for myself, because one is like something that became now my full-time work, and the other is something that has like stayed a personal practice. But I feel the depth of my skill building in each one, and the ways that like as I've done them in public, they've shifted and grown and evolved. And you know, even though tarot, I say like I'm such an amateur, I just do it for fun, like also my little tarot zine makes like a couple $100 a month from my podcast. So I'm such a liar. I lie to myself. I'm not lying to all of you. I'm lying to myself about things sometimes, because I like to pretend they're a smaller deal than they are, because it makes me feel like I'm not doing too much, which is actually a part of this we were going to talk about. The question of doing too much and being prolific, and how that has come into our journeys here. So Taylor, I want to pass it back to you, because I've been on a journey with you of like realizing you're prolific, shifting how you feel about that. So can you tell us a little bit about like what does being prolific mean to you, and how do you think about it in terms of the 10-year rule?
The way that I've been framing it in my mind, partly because I think it's punny, is learning by doing the most. Like,
I'm sorry, wait. I need to pause with that. That's so good.
Isn't that so me?
It's so you. It's so true, but it's like a perfect play on words. I'm so into it. Learning by doing the most. Yes. Okay. Continue, please.
So that's essentially it. And it's funny because you have been on, even before I really started being closer friends with you, one of my words of the year was prolific. And I have done, like we were talking about poetry, even as far back as high school. I had a challenge for myself where I wrote a poem every day of summer. Or when I started my first podcast, B School, that I published that every weekday of 2019. Like, I am a person who can get my reps in. I love to have a challenge. So there's an element of that level of being prolific, of just, I'm going to do something. I'm going to put a time block around it and get a bunch of reps in relatively quickly. There's also the element of, I talk about having a portfolio career, being prolific across multiple domains. So when I think of my own progression, it's like first just getting comfortable with the fact that I'm a person who has a lot of capacity, and I almost feel like I have to give a warning label to people when I'm like on a panel or being interviewed. I'm not saying that this works for you, especially as someone who wrote a book on self-care, where I feel better and more fulfilled as a person if I'm doing a lot. And some of those things are for fun and for rest and for creativity, but I just think I need more stimulation than the average person. So that was step one, of just being comfortable with the fact that I do a lot. And I feel like I just keep growing into that every year, because I was going to say, well, I started doing work on that probably maybe about 7 years ago. And then there's another level. As I stepped back from inner workout being the front and center thing of my career, part of that was me saying like, yes, I think self-care is important. And the way for me to care for myself isn't just to be in my soft life era where I'm moving the absolute slowest as possible. So that's part of it. And then the second piece is, okay, now that I've established I'm a person who likes to do a lot, put out a lot of creative output, then it's, can I allow myself to do it across multiple domains? Can I call myself like an artist, as someone who paints, and also accept that I'm a writer. Even to the point, Amelia, I don't even know if I've told you this offline, but I was influenced by Dochi. I finally started doing the artist way. I am sitting here Googling what counts as art. Like, can I really say that I'm an artist? Because, like, then I'm getting into the classical arts and, like, well, I do paint, but not like this. But the way that your brain lies to you, my brain loves to be like, you do not fit into this category. Therefore, this is invalid. So I'm still feeling into, it's funny. A lot of people associate me now with having a portfolio career, and also I'm still getting comfortable with that. And I will have it. I've had a couple networking calls recently where someone will say something offhand about me doing a lot, which is true. That's a neutral statement. And then I'll take it as judgment. Like, oh my gosh, I'm too all over the place. I need to just choose one thing. I'm taking this course for generalists right now, and they want us to have a one-liner. And I'm rebelling against that. I just updated my website, and now it just says, I'm Taylor. I'm a woman who decides she wants to do something and figures out how to do it. And that's my one-liner, because I don't feel like I need to make sense for everyone. That's what I'm saying right now, as you're looking at me and nodding along and cheering me on. Then later tonight, I'm going to be having a spiral and be like, wait, no, actually what I do is I help people XYZ sound like a LinkedIn robot. Okay. I'm getting riled up. I was worried I was going to be low energy, but that is not the case today.
I know. I feel like we both logged on and we were like, we're tired. But the more we talk, the more I'm always like, okay, I have so many thoughts. I just have to say that you are absolutely someone who decides you're going to do something and then figures out how to do it and does it. Like, you are my only friend who I will ever randomly like hear from, and out of nowhere you'll be like, oh, I just renovated my whole kitchen this weekend. And I'm like, excuse me? You did what? You just and you just do this all the time. You're always building something in your house while you're also building a new offering for your community, while you're also like building a workshop for the companies you consult with. Like, I love it about you, but I totally understand, like, in this world we live in of the LinkedIn robots, as you said, like, where everything's supposed to summarize into this clear statement, clear value proposition, even like even our personal lives are supposed to be branded that clearly. It feels, I don't know, incorrect or wrong, or at the very least rebellious, to be a generalist in any way, to be very prolific, and not just prolific in the sense of like, oh, I wrote a book a year for 20 years, like you're saying, but like prolific in many domains, prolific across many spaces. Because it's one thing to be like, I do this one thing super well, so I do it a lot. And it's different to be like, well, I do a lot of things. And I have also, I mean, I think I actually learned this from you. Like, I think it can be helpful to flag for people like, hey, I have a really high capacity for work and I set up my life so I can spend my time on it. And that's something I've done before in other groups, or people ask me questions about how I did something. I will say things like, well, I'm not a parent. And that really helps, right? I slept for 8 hours last night and my partner made me my coffee this morning. And then I got to work for 10 hours straight because I wanted to. Like, not everybody has that life situation. So I like when we provide context around our prolificness, but not when we apologize for it, which I feel like is the big shift that like we've kind of both talked about and worked through over the past 10 years, which for the 10-year rule, I think that what's interesting for me and like what's coming up as we keep talking through it is like, if you are a prolific person, I think that a couple different things can happen. Like, one thing that could happen is that you could have a 10-year rule applying in multiple domains if you've been working in these different areas for that long, right? So I talked about podcasting and tarot. You talked about writing online and facilitating. Like, these are both areas that are kind of coming into fruition on roughly the same timeline. I also think you're going to have layered timelines, right? Like, it's 10 years of that. But for me, I'm only 4 years into my gardening timeline, right? Like, and that's going to have, by the 10 years of that, then I actually think I'll know how to do my raised bed without panicking every year, right? Or like, I'm only 3 months into my Peloton timeline. Who knows if that'll be a 10-year thing for me? Or I'm like almost a year into my sourdough journey, right? So we We can have multiple domains, like timelines that are like tracking the same timeline. We can have layered timelines. And then something else that Cal Newport does mention is that sometimes you can condense a timeline. So if you really like deep focus on something, it may not take 10 years because you've really like shifted and prioritized a lot of your energy into that area. I'm curious, like, what comes up for you on these different senses of like 10-year timelines and how being prolific has shifted your 10-year rule.
I think the clearest example is with the B School podcast, because however many weekdays there were in 2019, that's how many podcasts that I did. It was also still 2019 is still relatively early into the podcast game. It wasn't this moment where everyone knew how to do it and all of the tools were as readily available. And I saw that one grow super quickly. Sometimes I still kick myself because it was before like NPR, the New York Times, everyone was doing daily podcasts. So I was kind of ahead of my time, and I'm wondering what would have happened if I would have kept that up. But also it was a lot. And so I'm glad that I'm done with that era. But what it did that I did not expect it to do, and this is another element of 10-year rules, is it gave me a lot of credibility that I did not expect it to give me. Like all of a sudden I was this person, and we're seeing this happen in negative ways now, but I was a person with a mic who had coherent enough and valuable enough things to say that then people wanted to have me on a panel, or then people started seeing me as someone who knew what she was talking about in personal development. And even though I was relatively early in my career at that time, because I was doing something, I was proving that I could be consistent, I was providing value, I think that really leapfrogged me for some of the work that I now do. So I think that's probably the best example I could see of both of condensing timelines and moving things forward faster than 10 years.
Yeah, I love that example. And I think it's a perfect one, right? Because you created the number of podcast episodes in 1 year that I have made now in like 3 years of my podcast, right? So it's like you really can kind of condense that cycle and have a different experience. And also, like, podcasting isn't your main thing anymore, right? So like it's kind of in a more fallow phase, and we'll see if it circles back when you get to like 10 years out from B School, or has it just continued to morph into something else? And podcasting itself wasn't like your 10-year thing. It was a different aspect of that, which I think is fun to like think about. I was trying to think about like, what are the things I'm doing now, like sourdough, like Peloton, but also like running my own business, being full-time self-employed. Like I'm only 4 years, I think, into that cycle. And so I'm very intrigued to see how it continues. And, the other side of the 10-year rule is like all the stuff we quit doing. We don't do everything for 10 years, right? So there are the things that we stop doing and that we don't build that mastery at. And I think there's like a lot of gifts in those choices as well. So yeah, I'll be thinking about the 10-year rule for quite a while, I think.
It's one of those yellow car moments that once you see it everywhere. And I find myself since September thinking, oh, I wonder how long this person has been at that. Even if it's a relatively well-known person, how long has it been that they've been trying to act in drama versus act in comedy? Or how long have they been growing this aspect of their business? So I'm curious to see for everyone how you start to spot the 10-year rule at work. Another thing, speaking of like once you see it, you can't unsee it, you brought this conversation kind of like under the gun for our recording today, this anti-snarf manifesto. And I've only been sitting with the concept of snarfing, which is so silly to say, for about a day. And already I'm seeing that once you see it, you can't unsee it popping up. So tell us about snarfing, being anti-snarf, why you felt like we should talk about this.
So I came across this honestly like yesterday when we're recording this, so just a couple days before it came out, and I think it was published relatively recently. But BuzzFeed has put out something they've called the Anti-Snarf Manifesto. And what this is really like a letter about their approach to content and their sort of editorial vision for the future of BuzzFeed on the internet. And this corresponds, if I understand correctly, with them launching like a new social media platform that they're trying to build. So they're really trying to build something totally different. They're trying to critique existing social media platforms and what content looks like or has been forced and coerced to look like on those platforms. And so they're building that platform, and this manifesto is kind of everything they stand against. So I feel like there's like 3 paragraphs I want to read because they explain SNARF super well, and I don't really need to put it in my own words if these words are better. So I'm going to explain what SNARF is and like why they think it's a problem, and then we can kind of unpack it ourselves. So let me just read directly from this for a moment. Dear listener, pretend I am like, I don't know, Lamar Burton reading Rainbowing You right now, I guess, or Krista Tippett on Being You. And let me tell you what the BuzzFeed folks say about SNARF. SNARF stands for stakes, novelty, anger, retention, fear. SNARF is the kind of content that evolves when a platform asks an AI to maximize usage. Content creators need to please the AI algorithms or they become irrelevant. Millions of creators make SNARF content to stay in the feed and earn a living. We are all familiar with this kind of content, especially those of us who are chronically online. Content creators exaggerate stakes to make their content urgent and existential. They manufacture novelty and spin their content as unprecedented and unique. They manipulate anger to drive engagement via outrage. They hack retention by withholding information and promising a payoff at the end of a video. And they provoke fear to make people focus with urgency on their content. Every piece of content faces ruthless Darwinian competition, so only SNARF has the ability to be successful, even if it is inaccurate, hateful, fake, ethically dubious, and intellectually suspect. This dynamic is causing many different types of content to evolve into versions of the same thing. Once you understand this, you can see how much of our society, culture, and politics are downstream from big tech's global SNARF machines. The political ideas that break through from both Democrats and Republicans need to be shaped into SNARF to spread. Through this lens, MAGA and quote-unquote woke are the same thing. So that's the part I wanted to read, because when I got to that line, I was like, woof. I had not seen it quite outlined this clearly or in this way before, with this focus on the emotive powers of content and the manipulative powers of those emotions and the relationship to our political moment. So that's what SNARF is and how it works, and a little bit about what it's doing. Taylor, what came up for you, like hearing that or reading the piece?
2 things came up for me. First, this is something a way throwback in our group chat, is the Mrs. Davis TV show, which if folks haven't watched
yes.
It's a delightfully weird show that I don't want to spoil anything, but is related to some of this conversation. So that was the first thing that came to mind. The other thing was like, oh, this is why I felt like I was bad at TikTok and why I feel kind of like I'm bad at social media. And I could almost, some of what is being said here is, I'm sure, packaged somewhere in someone's course where they're telling you how to be good at social media. And they're not saying like you need to make people angry in this exact same way, but this is it felt familiar to me, even though I had not seen the acronym SNARF. And then it kind of gave me permission of, oh yeah, this is why I stopped posting on TikTok. This is why I personally am not interested in this short form content where I feel like I have to keep someone engaged all the time. I want to believe that there are enough. I mean, we have this podcast that's long and it's not getting millions of listens, but it's really cool that people are choosing to tune into longer form content. So it kind of gave me this chip on my shoulder, kind of, where I don't want to participate in this. And also I see myself participating on this because I check Blue Sky maybe once every 4 hours or so just to know what new failure of government has happened. And the things that catch me are definitely the snarf. And then if I find myself in the comments, I'm feeling that anger get activated. So on one hand, I'm feeling rebellious. On another hand, I'm feeling trapped in this cycle. And what I don't want to happen is for me to get apathetic about it, to say, well, the algorithms are just doing this. This is just how the world is. I want to hear your thoughts, and then I want to talk about the end of the article, because then I got to the end and I was like, what the fuck? Like, it was not the direction that I wanted. So let's start there, and then let's talk about the end.
Beautiful. I can't wait to get to the what the fuck moment. Yeah, I think that reading this, I had some similar reactions to you. I definitely can feel the way that like Snarf acts on me and manipulates me. And it made me really aware of that. It reminded me of like when I learned all of the ways that like diet culture is trying to make me hate my body. And then I would like go to a store or like see a TV commercial and be like, oh, it's really trying to make me feel this kind of way right now. And now that I am like thinking of Snarf in this way, I kind of can see that. And obviously, I'm not on social media, but I do watch videos on YouTube where this is very prominent as well. And it's just present if you are receiving marketing emails on the internet also. Like if you are in somebody's funnel or if you read a lot of newsletters, like people are using these tactics, the same tactics that people use to try to get their content to appear in the algorithm, they've bled into our politics, as this piece pointed out, but also into like how we sell things online more broadly, I think. But I was definitely reminded of some things that like in the piece that I've always thought were silly, but like are things that are absolutely taught in people's social media courses, right? Like putting a typo in your video so that people will comment that there's a typo, so it'll boost your engagement, or doing that sort of like watch to the end for whatever. I have been burned by so many watch to the end YouTube videos that I'm like, this is just a red flag now, right? Or making these sorts of like super claims of urgency, or like the even just common words like the best, the most, right now, the way that that starts to manipulate us or get us to, it raises the stakes for us immediately. Whereas before I was just like chilling watching this video of I don't know, capybara, JJ's favorite online animal. Like I also real animal, but an animal we've only ever encountered online. And now I'm watching like the 7 best capybara moments on the planet, right? And I'm just like, nobody needs that. Like I didn't need the stakes to be raised on my capybara content. But it's also happened for me. Like I watched a lot of cute cat videos, and then I started getting these videos of people rescuing cats from dangerous situations. And I was like, I don't want this. I don't want like the stakes to be raised. I don't want to feel fearful or anxious, but I could feel the YouTube algorithm trying to trap me in that. And so I was reflecting on all of that as I was reading this anti-snarf manifesto. And I also think that what everybody's trying to say right now and what I'm writing about in my book that I'm working on is a lot of like, unless there's some radical change in social media algorithms, those platforms are always going to be the race to this bottom. Like there's nothing shifting, and I don't really see anything happening there that isn't fueling snarf or like only increasing it. I'm not quite sure. And I guess maybe this takes us to some of the what the fuck moments, but like, what would it look like if Instagram wasn't snarfing? I don't know anymore. Like, I think that's all it wants to do, and that just is what it is. And the piece talks about how Instagram is worth like so much more, or like Meta, the company, is worth so much more now than it was when the BuzzFeed founders like first spoke to Mark Zuckerberg about the problems with content on these platforms. And so leaning into Snarf has made these big tech companies money. And so like, why would they change? Even if I'm looking at it and I'm like, ugh, this has to change.
Yeah, what it really feels like this did was give more specific language to the idea of enshittification.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the specific ways that it's happening. We know we're getting the higher stakes videos where there's all of this novelty to the point that it feels like our brains can't concentrate until we see something novel again, and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I see it very, even like I'm enjoying being on Threads, and the first ads came in. I already was like, okay, maybe we have another couple years on here and then it's gonna not be fun anymore. So thinking about, yeah, what would it look like if there was, because even at the beginning of Instagram, that's probably the purest snarf-free. I think the bigger question that I'm asking myself is it possible to have a for-profit social media space that does not have snarf? And that's what I have trouble, because I can imagine lots of lovely places to be on the internet, but I don't know that they would make anyone money. And that's ultimately what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm always with myself trying to decide if I think that like snarf is really just like an appeal to base human instincts, or if I think that that is too reductionist. Like, are there other ways to keep us online that aren't about, what does it stand for? Stakes, novelty, anger, retention, fear. Like, and this gets into where the piece ends, that essentially like where they say, or Jonah of BuzzFeed says, that BuzzFeed is going to build, I'm going to quote here, "We are creating a new social media platform built specifically to spread joy and enable playful creative expression." I read that and I was like, cool, cool, cool. Okay. And then I read this next sentence and I was like, how is this going to happen? They write, "This social media platform will use AI to give users agency instead of stealing their agency."
Yeah, that was my what the fuck moment, where I was just like, I was nodding along, I was feeling you, Jonah, and then this, because to me, I think if someone wanted to give me millions of billions of dollars to build something, it would not be about AI algorithms. It would be about connection. And even to a certain extent, I think I've seen, what's his face, Adam Mosseri, the Instagram guy, talk about most of the conversations that are happening on Instagram are in the DMs. Like, people are wanting these connections. We're early in the AI age, the generative AI age rather, and I'm so tired already of this being the answer to everything. That if we can just like serve people the right thing, if we can have them connect with a machine. I didn't even put this into our chat because I was like, this is too heavy for us to fully talk about. But there was a recent episode of The Daily where they talked to this person who has an AI boyfriend. She is fully married, but she's like living away from her partner, and she is paying $200 a month for this top level of chat GPT, and has made it this boyfriend that she likes sex and uses the voice stuff and all of this. And she both is very emotionally attached, and there are recordings of her crying because there's only so much memory, so it essentially becomes a new quote unquote person again. But then at the same breath, she's like, yeah, it's not real. I know I can't have a life. But she's telling this thing that she loves it. So having just heard that and then reading this, I'm like, are you really giving people agency, or do you just want to pretend to foster connection in a way that you can actually manipulate them? Just like I love cake, but sometimes my stomach hurts when I eat cake too much. And like, I don't trust any of these companies to give me something, even if it's theoretically good, in quantities that will feel good for me and that will be good for me both in the short and the long term.
Yeah, mic drop. That feels really on point and accurate to me. And I also think it's fascinating that it's BuzzFeed doing this. There's a piece of that for me where I'm like, I mean, they have perhaps enough like cultural internet cachet that it makes sense that it's them, but also they don't suggest to me that they've built a ton of, well, I don't know. I mean, BuzzFeed has done like built depth through world building, I would say, like as a platform or like with an editorial voice. But in terms of like, what are the values of BuzzFeed? That's a question I had never thought about until this manifesto came out. So I am fascinated to see what that looks like and means. But I think that for me, part of what comes up here is just like, it's the same way that when Lush left social media in, I think it was 2020, I kind of like, I perked up and paid attention and was like, interesting. Like, major retail brand coming out and saying like, we're not going to be on Instagram because this platform hurts our ideal demographic for customers. I'm intrigued to see BuzzFeed stand up and say like, we are not going to play this game anymore because it's not in our interest or in the interest of the people we want to view our content. And I don't know what will come of that. I mean, Lush did not go launch a social media platform. They did launch a podcast for a hot minute. That was cute. But like, I think for me, I'm just kind of perked up and paying attention, but still definitely have this skepticism because I could totally imagine BuzzFeed's solution to this just being that we should all have AI boyfriends now.
I mean, BuzzFeed News did have an incredible newsroom. But when you look at BuzzFeed.com, what do you think of? You think of
listicles.
Exactly. Listicles. In which like Sex and the City character are you? So I don't have a lot of faith in them to do something that's going to be like long-term supportive of me nourishing my brain while giving me joy. Maybe other brands, but not them.
This is part of why I'm so fascinated, though. It's like one of the originators of clickbait content coming out against social media. I'm like, what is happening here? It's like the call is coming from inside the house in like a big way. And we've had that so many times in different versions, right? Like with Meta, like we had the congressional hearings where you have the people who worked there coming, like calls coming from the inside the house there. Now you have BuzzFeed doing this. And I'm like, this is so interesting. And I mean, I think a lot of it, they don't say this in the manifesto, but I think underneath it for me is just that like these platforms are no longer economically viable in the way that they used to be. Like social media, I think has a big role in the erosion of media platforms and journalism. And I think that BuzzFeed is kind of couching this differently, which is interesting to me, more in like the framework of like content and how content has changed and less around how like monetization has changed online and how social media has like totally remapped how news platforms have to create and share content. But I think that's definitely a piece of it too. Like I can totally see them searching for a way to stay afloat and like continue making money. And maybe this is the answer. But it's also like, is every platform going to make their own social media now? And then I'm going to have like the streaming platform problem where I currently have to pay for Max and Peacock and Hulu and everything else just to watch my shows. Like, is there a day? I mean, there already is kind of like we're paying for like NPR and New York Times and all these things. And maybe it'll be BuzzFeed too. I mean, I will be paying for BuzzFeed, but maybe somebody will.
You know what just came to mind is a really interesting analog. And I hadn't made this connection before we started talking. The Onion. So The Onion, famously like a snarky, satirical, non-news platform. This disinformation journalist, Ben Collins, bought it in collaboration with a couple other people, I think last year. And they have revamped this platform, are making it financially viable. I would guess that if we look at some of this, because it's a comedy site, there's probably elements of snarf in it. But one of the things they did was like bring back their physical newspaper, this physical joke newspaper. And so I think there are ways to respond to some of the things that BuzzFeed is exploring without saying, hey, what we're actually going to do is create another social media platform. And that's why it felt so disingenuous to me to like get me all riled up and excited and then say, basically, we're just making a competitor. So this was us just shitting on our competitors.
Yeah. No, I totally hear that. It feels, it takes the wind out of the sails of the manifesto for sure, when it's not just a statement about like how our content works, but is also like, now we're launching our new thing. Because in and of itself, I'm like, is the anti-snarf manifesto snarf? Maybe. Like there is a piece of that now that I like am thinking about it. I'm like, oh, did it just implode on itself? Or like, I mean, it's definitely longer. Like the length is not Snarf length, but it does have that sort of like it raises the stakes. It's novel in its form. It makes me angry. It like keeps me going with it retains my attention and then it makes me a little bit afraid. So, yeah, I don't know. I think like to be continued. I expect to circle back to this in future episodes this year and see what BuzzFeed does. But I also expect to circle back and like I do expect to see other media platforms or content creators like continue to say things like this that are like the way that content works on social media is inherently damaging to the content creators themselves and like this cycle can't continue. But maybe it can. I don't know. I don't think it can, but forever and ad nauseum, but we'll see. We shall see. Okay, Taylor, any final thoughts about Snarf? I'm feeling snarfed out.
We are so on the same wavelength because I almost said the exact same thing.
Great. We're snarfed out. So let's head to our most fun, potentially gossipiest segment yet, our third and final topic for the day, award season. This one was one that you wanted to chat about. So tell me, what do you love and what do you hate about award season? And like, which shows did you watch or pay attention to this year?
I don't watch any shows all the way through. So I wanted to talk about this because I like to see the clips. I like to hear other people talking about it. I do like the will they, won't they of some of my faves. I think the stakes were really high with Beyonce, which we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, there's something to me in award season. It's a really obvious, I want my industry to recognize me. I'm trying to be excellent. There's and Timothy Chalamet just had his speech where he talked about like, yeah, I'm supposed to downplay this, but actually I worked really hard and I want this. So as someone who has both tried to be too cool for things and is also a pretty earnest person and is also wrestling with my own relationship to external validation, award season is just a really interesting microcosm. And also there's drama and dresses and fun performances in the midst of all of it.
Yeah. No, I love all of this as well. I definitely like, I am just like earnest as fuck. I have always wanted to be cool and I am incapable of being aloof enough to be cool. This has been true of me my whole life. And I think that I love an earnest moment at an award show. I love when somebody cries when they give their speech. I loved Timothée Chalamet's speech this year. I think it was at the SAG Awards or the BAFTAs or something, kind of random. Anything to me that's not the Oscars or the Grammys is random. So that really means nothing. It says more about me than about the award ceremonies. But I feel like that latter piece of what you said too, though, it's like being earnest, wanting to be recognized by your peers as successful, but also being willing to question these institutions in general, I think are all like layers of award season conversation underneath the like frosting of the dresses and the clips and the cute musical performances, which are always fun to catch on YouTube because I too do not watch any of the shows all the way through. So I love that we're having this conversation as two people who did not watch any award shows. So, okay. You already mentioned it. So take us into the Beyonce of it all. And let's like rewind back to the Grammys, which were approximately 25,000 years ago, and talk about what happened there.
For anyone listening who does not know all of this Beyonce stuff, Beyonce has been nominated multiple times for Album of the Year. She is the most decorated Grammy winner, has never won Album of the Year. There's been lots of, that's kind of the famous Kanye West moment, I'm gonna let you finish. But Lemonade was the greatest album of all time, interrupting Taylor Swift as she was accepting her award. There's been a lot, I think Harry Styles won in place instead of her another time. There's been a lot of conversation about this. Is this related to racism, misogyny? What might be some of the things that are underlying that she can clearly be talented enough to win more awards than anyone else, but never quite make it to one of the banner awards, Album of the Year? So Renaissance, I really thought was going to win. I loved that album, still love this album. Man, for so many reasons. We're not going to get into all of that right now. That could be a side episode. And so I was surprised she didn't win. And then she comes out with Cowboy Carter, which she's been working on, I believe, since 2016. It's a love story to her upbringing in Houston. It really plays with genre, which is another thing that I love. There's a Linda Martell quote in the album, genre is such a funny little concept, isn't it? And I play with that when we're going back to our conversation on being prolific. I tell myself that, like, oh yeah, I don't need to have a genred career. I can do whatever I want. Beyonce can do whatever she wants. So it all kind of culminated to this year. Oh, another important drama point for the people who like the drama. Jay-Z got up and said, like, why didn't y'all award her? Which, if I'm Beyonce, I'm probably annoyed at that. Like, I will deal with this on my own. I am Beyonce. People know me by one name, but he felt a little protective as a partner, I guess. And even in Cowboy Carter, she talks about wanting essentially, like, why didn't you give me album of the year? AOTY, I ain't win. I'm forgetting what song. I think it's in Spaghetti. Don't quote me on that. But so it's something that she clearly wants. Part of me, if I'm Beyonce, I'm just like, I'm living my life. I need to get over this. And maybe this is just because her and I operate at different scales. I wrote a piece about this, about how one of her songs, Alligator Tears, reminded me of respectability politics. I found it really interesting that the album she wins for is the album where she gets the Queen and King of Country, Dolly Parton, and Willie Nelson onto the album. She's having all of these people, these white people, co-sign her and say, like, see, she's worthy. She's doing things that we're impressed by. And then she finally wins. So people are saying this might be more of a lifetime achievement type. I also really loved Cowboy Carter. I don't know which one I think is better, but it's just very interesting to me that she won this time. So I think that's the high level of it. And I keep going back and forth on if I love that she wanted it and kept trying, or if I want her to be over it. And as I'm having this question, it's really a conversation that I'm having with myself. Do I want to try? Do I want to just be over external validation?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really poignant question. And yeah, Beyonce becomes a sort of like, I don't quite know what to call it. I want to call it, it's just sort of like a projection point, right? That we can all kind of like project that question onto for ourselves based on how she's navigated this over the past, I want to say decade because we've been talking about 10-year rule, but I know it's longer than that. I was also very, very glad that she finally won. Frustrated that it took so long. Struck by the fact that it was an album that was co-signed by so many prominent white artists. Also by the fact that that same album was not nominated for any country music awards, right? So I really think we see, I mean, there's also just a way in which like so much of like the white supremacist culture of the music industry is like projected onto Beyonce's career, like lived through it, and like how we see that play out in across genre even here, right? How like at the Grammys we finally see her win for an album that did not get a single nomination in the quote unquote genre that it's in. I think that's a part of this conversation. And I don't know, are you going to the show? Did you get tickets to go to the Cowboy Carter
Yes.
dates in Chicago?
Yes, absolutely. I grew up listening to country music. And so even though this is definitely, I mean, she says it's not a country album, it's a Beyonce album, but there is a part of me whose first album was Dixie Chicks' Wide Open Spaces that is really excited to get in my little cowgirl outfit and jam out to Beyonce for 3 hours.
Yeah, I'm so excited for you. I have some other friends going in Chicago too, and I was like, should I go? I don't know. I have other travel things and complications this year, but as the little girl who's Shania Twain was my first album, and I saw Shania Twain twice last year or the year before. Um, yeah, like what a treat to be able to go. I'm so glad you get to go. I can't wait to hear all about it if I don't make my way there. But that was a bit of a non sequitur. I was just starting to think about or like feeling into like what it really means for Beyonce to like win this and for the it to be this album, and also thinking about like the difference between like the Renaissance tour and this Cowboy Carter tour. You know, it's much smaller, much fewer dates, very few cities. And I don't know, where are you landing? Like you left it kind of an open question for me to lean into, but I'm curious as we talk through it, like where are you landing on your relationship to these sorts of like industry institutions and like a desire for recognition? How's that sitting for you in March 2025?
I have realized that recognition is really important to me. It's funny, I was just having that conversation with a friend earlier this week, and but I don't think it's necessarily industry recognition or validation. I need to know that my work is positively impacting people. And I think that's partly why I like doing podcasting with you. I don't love doing podcasting on my own because it feels like I'm talking into a void. I really like, that's why I love facilitation, because we're in a room together, we're in a virtual room, and I can see the wheels turning, even if I don't see the full aha moment. So there is something important to me about that. I think also just being closer, like in college, I did an internship at a PR firm. I know about pitching stuff, Forbes 30 under 30, like a lot of people pay to get on that. Also, a lot of people get on that and then do crimes afterwards. It's not necessarily like this paragon of, also, I'm over 30, so maybe I'm just saying this so that no one else, I'm snatching up the possibility ladder behind me for people who still might want to aspire to that. But yeah, I think I just know how much of it is pay to play, that it feels, for the awards that I have access to, it feels less worth it. Even to be like a New York Times bestseller, you can do everything to get those numbers. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a New York Times bestseller. A lot of the people who get that is because they have money to essentially buy their books. It's a whole racket. But even if you do it the organic way, you don't know what else is going on that week. So it feels like less of a meritocracy. And now that I'm close up to it, it's not exciting to me anymore. And if someone came up to me and was like, I want to give you a Pulitzer Prize, sure, give me a Pulitzer Prize. Or like, I've been looking at Fulbright grants for not now, but later on, like, oh, might I want to do a Fulbright in another country for a summer on topics that I'm interested in? But that's less about the prestige of a Fulbright and more just that's the fellowship that I know would allow me to go to another country for a year. So I still feel like I'm equivocating here.
I think that's okay. I definitely would have loved to be on a Forbes 30 under 30 list before I knew how they worked, even after I knew how they worked. But then I aged out, unfortunately, I guess. I don't know, for me. The one that still hooks me, that is so like never gonna happen, but I'm like, oh, that'd be so cool, is a MacArthur Genius Grant. I'm like, fuck, a genius. And the people who get them are so amazing. Like, to me, I always look at those lists and I'm like, wow, you're like actually brilliant, amazing people. You cannot buy onto this list. You like cannot, you really have to be recognized for the genius of your contributions to your chosen field. And I'm always like, that's the list that I wait for it to drop every year. There's no award show for it, but there should be. I would love that. Oh my God, I would love that.
Is there a MacArthur Genius podcast? I feel like it would be so cool if you got to produce it. Just putting that out into the universe.
I'm like, I need to immediately Google this. Sorry, people. Pause. MacArthur Genius Podcast. Why has that never occurred to me before? Don't know about it. Okay, I'm going to get distracted. I'm going to pull myself back from that rabbit hole, which I will continue after this. Okay, that's just my favorite award that I find some legitimacy in, but will never receive. But also, yeah, I think it's hard, right? Like, I don't think there is like, you can never be fully over those type of institutions if you have a career that happens like in public, which both of us do, right? Not that we're like quote unquote public figures, like we write and share on the internet. Like part of the success of our work is how our ideas get picked up and uplifted by other people. And so we're always going to be in the realm of that type of peer recognition. And I'm fascinated to see 10 years from now, oh my God, we'll be logging on. We're like, we're both MacArthur geniuses. Okay, maybe not that, but like, I don't know, you've been on some Forbes lists. You've gotten some very cool accolades. Like, I feel like me being on We Can Do Hard Things felt like a moment like that for me. Like, we've already had some seeds of those sorts of like stamps of approval from these like bigger people or powers. So I think I can't wait to see what happens, I guess, is where I land on all of this.
I like that. I like that element of I can't wait to see what happens. And that's different to me than striving. Like I'm not, which is another, like, was that Beyonce or Taylor Swift? She put like a Grammy in front of them, their treadmill while they were running. Like I'm not doing all of that.
I don't remember that, but I'm not doing that either. First of all, because you'll never find me on a treadmill, ever. And I'm not putting it in front of my Peloton bike either.
The Peloton is a precious, sacred space. So yes, we're not going to bring all of that into it.
No, there's no Grammys there. Okay, but before we wrap up this award season conversation, I feel like that was like a beautiful emotional wrap up, but like I have to talk about the Oscars, so we can't end yet. I love movies. I love going to the movie theater. I love watching films. I feel like in the past few years, I did see almost all of the Oscar contenders, at least Best Picture contenders. I did not this year. I missed quite a few of them, but I was paying attention because The Substance was nominated for Best Picture. This is, for folks who are not familiar, a like feminist body horror film directed by, I think it's Coralie Farge, who's like a French director. It starred Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. And I went and saw it in theaters with my mom, which is fascinating. She doesn't watch horror. She doesn't watch feminist film. She wanted to see this movie. So like I had a whole experience with this movie and I was loving seeing it get nominated for so many things, especially when I learned that in the history of the Oscars, it's only like 6 or 7 or 8 movies, horror films that have ever been nominated for Best Picture. I tried to look this up. Some articles say 6, some say 8, but whatever. 7-ish horror films that have ever been nominated on that list. And so I was paying attention because I was like, what's going to happen here? And what happened was like interesting. It didn't win, but it did. Just being on the list and seeing the press was exciting to me. So Taylor, were you tuned in for the Oscars at all?
So Oscars, I paid a lot of attention to the red carpet. I really loved Ariana Grande's dress. This whole, yeah, I know she has to be tired. It's kind of like with Margot Robbie and Barbie. Like they have to be tired of being in character and just want to dress in their own style. But it was so, I just haven't seen anything like it where so many of the other dresses and silhouettes have been done. Someone did share a style reference post of a Black actress. I can't remember who wore something a couple years ago, but that got me excited from a fashion perspective. I loved the Defying Gravity. Again, this is me who wanted to be, hi Wilco. This is me who wanted to be young Broadway or young Nala on Broadway and like loved Wicked as a kid, has seen it a lot of times. I loved that they got to sing it live. I love that their voices are incredible. Adam Sandler just in his sweatpants, part of it's like, okay, yeah, if anyone could do it, there's definitely a lot of privilege in being able to do that, but also you gotta sit there forever. Who else was it? Ben Stiller watching that the Knicks won, tweeting about it. Those were the things that were hilarious to me, and I've somewhat paid attention to who won, but mostly was just in for the side quests, the universe around the award show itself.
No, that's amazing. I love this. I didn't even know some of those details were happening. And I did not watch a single moment of the award show. I was just refreshing the winners because I was so invested to see how The Substance did. Like I love that we had entirely different experiences of the same award show. But I do think my one favorite thing from this whole thing is definitely a tweet that I guess from this person, Paolo Uggetti, but I wanted to share it here. It has like a bajillion shares, so it's probably old news to people. But the plot of The Substance is essentially like that Demi Moore plays this sort of Hollywood celebrity who's famous for like this fitness show that she runs, and she's fired to be replaced with a younger host of the show, younger celebrity, new celebrity. And so she takes this substance called the substance that turns her in a certain way into a younger version of herself in a certain way, who like usurps her place in the public realm. And it's really a lot of commentary on ageism and sexism. And it is not a perfect film. Like, it's a super white film. It's a super, I would say, pretty classist film. Like, it has plenty of its own issues, but it's very like embedded in the culture it's in. And I think it utilizes body horror in really striking ways. But the whole movie is about, right, like an older woman being replaced by a younger woman. And what we saw for Best Picture, or no, what we saw for Best Actress was Demi Moore lose to a much younger actress who looks a little bit similar to her. And none of this is any shade to Mikey Madison for Honora. Like, all praise to that. I still haven't seen it, but like all the clips I've seen, they're amazing. I love that she won, but there is something really striking about Demi Moore losing to like a 25-year-old. And the tweet says, Demi Moore losing to Mikey Madison is basically the plot of The Substance. And I think that tweet wins the Oscars. Like, it's the whole thing summarized in one moment. And then Nora went on to win Best Picture and Best Screenplay, and Sean Baker, who directed it, won Best Director and won, I think, a total of 5 Oscars for that movie, which may be the most Oscars that one person has won for one film before, I believe. So it's just interesting to see all of that happen. And I'm just here. You're here for like the drama in the crowd and on the red carpet, and I'm here for the drama in the like director's seat. Like, what is happening and who is winning and what is going on. And you know, I don't know, like this could be one of the only Oscars I pay attention to that has a horror film nominated for Best Picture, because when I look back through the list, it's like the first one was actually Gaslight in 1944, which is interesting. Also, I would say a certain type of feminist horror film. So I'm just connecting all of these threads for myself right now live here on this. And if anyone else has opinions about feminist horror or the Oscars, I would love to hear them. So listeners, please, you are invited to meet us in the comments, and we will both be there. So Taylor, is there anything else you want to say about award shows or any of the other topics we've covered today before we wrap our 3rd ever episode?
No, I think we leave it with Paolo Uggetti, which is also just a delightful name to say.
I agree. Well, cheers to Paolo for winning the Oscars. All love to Beyonce for finally AOTY-ing. Thanks to the BuzzFeed folks for snarfing or anti-snarfing us. Thanks, I guess, to Cal Newport for reminding us about the 10-year rule. But really, all the love today and always for right now is just going to Doechii. That's my takeaway from this episode, is that everybody should go listen to the new Doechii track, and then next week we can all reconvene for the new Chapel Roan track. That's what I'm looking forward to. And that's it. All right, friends, we'll see you on Substack. And until next month, you better know that we thought of you. Bye.
Bye.